Hello, welcome to Photography 101. Today, I'm going to be teaching you how to use your camera to take photos. There are 3 particular settings that we are going to be learning in order for you to understand how to use your camera and take the best quality photos. The first thing I need to introduce you to is the exposure triangle. These are the 3 settings, like a triangle, that you are going to be learning about in order to manually adjust and fix the lighting and control the type of photo that you want to take. The 3 settings are aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. We're going to be starting with aperture, and we're going to do some mini activities to help you truly understand how to use these settings on your camera. So one thing I do want you to remember before we get started on all of this is that the 3 exposure settings that we are going to be talking about all affect the lighting of the camera. When you are adjusting either all 3 settings, you are going to be adjusting how bright it's going to look, how dark it's going to look. Another thing that you will be adjusting within these settings is the quality of the photo. So how your photo exactly is going to turn out will be influenced by the 3 settings that you will be adjusting. We're going to go through each one by one so that you truly understand the purpose of each setting. The first setting that we're going to be talking about is aperture. Imagine your camera is like the eye. When you're opening and closing your eye, you're letting in a certain degree of light. For example, when you're in a bright setting, for example, out in the sun, sometimes you have to squint because you don't want to let in too much light so that you can reduce the amount of light going in. But if you want a lot of light and you're in a dark setting, like in a dark room, you're going to keep your eyes open. So the aperture works in a very similar way. The aperture is a little opening inside your camera that is like a window. So it lets in a certain amount of light, and it also affects how blurry and sharp it's going to look. But first, let's focus on lighting. The aperture is measured in something called f-stops. F-stops can start out as low as f1.2 to f22, and that is the scale. What I want you to do first, we're going to do a little activity where you're going to turn on your camera and you're going to locate the aperture settings on your camera. It should have a number beside the f-stop. And what I want you to do is to take note of the lowest and highest f-stop that you have in your camera. So you're going to do that activity now. You're going to pause this video, go look at your camera, and you're going to find the lowest f-stop and the highest f-stop on your camera. Pause this video and then we'll get started after you do this. Now that you've identified your highest and lowest f-stop, I want you to apply that knowledge into how you understand how the f-stop works. The lowest f-stop on my camera is 1.2 and the highest f-stop is f22. So how does that work? My lowest f-stop number is 1.2. That means that my aperture is big. So this is it. Let's say this is your f-stop and this is 1.2. And when I adjust it to f22, the window is going to close and it's going to be smaller, which means that it is a small aperture. You are letting less light in. The smaller the number, the bigger the aperture. The bigger the number, the smaller the window. So just remember that. So that is how much light you're letting in. So if I have an f-stop of 1.2, I'm letting a lot of light in. My window is very big. Now, if I have an f-stop of f22, my window becomes smaller, thus letting less light in. That is how it works. Now, why does it matter? Besides light, aperture also controls how blurry or sharp your photo is going to look. When you have a wide aperture, which means that it is a large aperture, it means that you are going to get a blurry background. Now, if you have a narrow aperture, which is the smaller ones, the smaller windows, you are going to get a sharp background. So let's say, for example, I want to take a photo of myself, portrait, but I want to ignore everything else. You're going to want to have a wide aperture, which means that you will need to set your settings on your camera to a low f-stop. And likewise, if I go outside and I want to take a photo of a landscape, I want to make sure that I capture it in a higher f-stop because I want there to be a narrow aperture, which means that the higher number. One thing I do want you to know about before we get into this other activity is aperture priority. Aperture priority is an opportunity for you and your camera to only focus on one setting. In this case, we only want to focus on adjusting the aperture. Where can you find the aperture priority setting on your camera? There is a setting called AV that represents aperture priority. When you set it on aperture priority, you will not be adjusting anything else in your exposure triangle. That means you're not adjusting your shutter speed and ISO. You are only adjusting your aperture. I also want to explain why it's important to just focus on your aperture. Let's say, for example, you're taking a photo of a live event and you want to focus on the quality of photo rather than the lighting. And in aperture, the quality that you are adjusting is how blurry or sharp your photo is going to look. And the advantage of using an aperture priority setting is that you won't need to worry about adjusting the lighting of your camera, but more so whether you can get a blurry background or not. So now we're going to use a camera simulator. The camera simulator will allow you to adjust something in aperture priority, and then you will also try manual. And the reason why I wanted you to do that is I want you to understand what exactly you are adjusting. So shooting mode aperture priority is recognized as AV. You're going to click on AV, and then you're going to set your aperture on a low f-stop. The low f-stop there is 1.4. When you do that, I want you to observe what happens, and I want you to take note on how it affects the brightness and depth of field. Then we're going to move on to set your aperture to a high f-stop, which is around 19. So I want you to also observe what happens when you adjust the f-stop to 19. How does it affect the brightness and the depth of field? Now, the same thing for manual. You will notice that when you are on manual, the shutter speed and the ISO will not automatically move. So you just keep it as is, but you will only adjust your aperture. I want you to set your aperture to a low f-stop of 1.4, and I want you to observe what happens, how it affects the exposure and the overall image. And the same thing when you adjust it to f-stop 19, what happens to the exposure and the overall image. So I want you to pause this video, try it out, and I want you to share it with your classmate or share it to somebody next to you or write it down on what exactly happens when you utilize those two settings. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a little wrap up of what happens. So with aperture, I want you to remember, aside from the lighting, aperture also affects how blurry and sharp your photo is going to look. Your aperture is measured in f-stop. You have a wide aperture setting and a narrow aperture setting. When you are having a wide aperture setting, that means that it is a low number, f1.2 to around 1.8 to around f2.8. That's what you're going to do. Then for narrow aperture, you have something like f11, f16. Now, when you are adjusting those settings, if you have a wide aperture, that means you are going to get the effect of a shallow depth of field. Shallow depth of field is when your photo is clear on the subject and then blurry in the background. So you have a different depth of field. If you want a narrow aperture, remember that the photo is going to look clear. So let's say it's best for landscape photos. Now, this is what I just want you to remember when you are moving forward with aperture. When we are going to be using all three settings, just remember the aperture is going to affect not only the lighting, but how blurry and sharp your photo is going to look. What I want you to do is I want you to take a little quiz and I want you to test your understanding of aperture to see if you fully grasp it. If you don't, I recommend that you watch this video again to really fully comprehend everything.